Hello, bienvenidos, and welcome to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute's conference session on disruptive innovation, reinventing businesses in an unpredictable era. My name is Nina Cavazos, and I am CHCI's Corporate Relations Manager. And on behalf of everyone at CHCI, I would like to thank Philip Morris International for their generous support of this session. Before we begin our panel, I would like to introduce our panel host, Congressman Vicente Gonzalez, and our moderator, Ana Cabrera. Congressman Gonzalez represents Texas's 15th congressional district, which encompasses the growing suburban counties of Brooks, Duval, Guadalupe, Jim Hogg, Karnes, and Live Oak, as well as portions of Hidalgo and Wilson counties. Congressman Gonzalez came to Washington to continue fighting for South Texans and ensure that individuals and communities have the resources and opportunities they need to succeed. Congressman Gonzalez serves on the House Financial Services Committee as well as the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The congressman also serves as an appointee to the U.S.-Mexico Interparliamentary Group. This panel today is bringing together representatives from the business sector to discuss the need for and future of innovation. And to help us moderate the discussion, we're delighted to have award-winning journalist and news anchor Ana Cabrera. Ana is the anchor of the weekend primetime edition of CNN Newsroom, based in New York, and she is the 2019 recipient of the National Hispanic Media Coalition Impact Award. We hope you enjoy the session and that you'll continue the conversation with us on social media with hashtag CHCIHHM20. And now I give you Congressman Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to deliver the opening remarks for this session of business. I'm honored that the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute asked me to speak on a matter that's important to me. Since coming to the House of Representatives, it has been a priority of mine to support American business, big and small. It's important that we balance the equation for the Latino community and for all Americans. This is true for our job seekers and for our employers. We were entering unprecedented territory even before the pandemic. Our small and medium-sized businesses have been especially crippled because of COVID-19. And while the Paycheck Protection Program has been a lifeline for many, we still have work to do. We must put aside our differences, to say the least, and find an agreement with incentives to restart our economy safely. This unpredictable time in history has disrupted every aspect of life for all of us. It's critical that we come together and support innovation to keeping business going. Latino-owned businesses account for about 4% of the U.S. business revenue and about 5.5% of U.S. employment. Over the last decade, the number of Latino businesses grew approximately 34%, compared to 1% for the rest of American business. And 1/3 of these entrepreneurs are under the age of 45. So clearly, our community every day is becoming more important. Every day is playing a larger role and more integral role in our economy. And one is that we must continue to support these during complex times. It is our voice. Nuestro poder.
Good afternoon, or maybe good morning, depending on where you are watching and joining from. I'm Ana Cabrera. Again, I am the weekend primetime anchor on CNN in the CNN Newsroom, and it is a pleasure to be part of the conversation today. Thank you so much for participating as well. I want to say thanks to Congressman Gonzalez as well for those great opening remarks, setting the tone for our conversation here today. And thank you to CHCI for hosting this powerful leadership conference and deciding to focus on this important issue that we're going to discuss today, disruptive innovation. I think it's safe to say all of our lives have been disrupted over the past several months because of the coronavirus. The way we work, where we work, how our kids learn, how we shop, the things we're purchasing, how we connect with our family and friends. And so, yeah, COVID has disrupted all of our lives. It's forced all of us to innovate in different ways. In fact, the very fact we're having this conversation here virtually online is an example of how we've had to reimagine how we do things. But when the impetus for change isn't a once in a century pandemic, what is? How do you identify those things? And how do you get ahead of it so that you can be a leader in your organization and in your industry? That's what we're going to explore today. And I have a couple of subject matter experts who have experience in very different realms. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before I introduce them, I want to remind you, we will be answering some of your questions at the end of our session. So please start asking those questions as you're thinking about them. You can use that text box on the right side of your screen where it says Q&A and have at it. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist today. Please welcome Jaime Casap. Now, Jaime served as the Chief Education Evangelist at Google for more than 14 years. He was the second member of the Google for Education team. And in that time, Jaime launched Google's G Suite's tools into higher education and K-12. He launched Chromebooks into education. He was the creator of the Google for Education Transformation Framework, a holistic approach to education transformation. And now Jaime is partnering and collaborating with higher education institutions, school systems, businesses, helping them elevate education and bring equity, diversity, and inclusion into their policies and practices. Next, let's welcome Martin King. He is the CEO of Philip Morris International America. Martin joined Philip Morris International in 2003. He has held many executive level positions in the company, including Senior Vice President of Operations, President of the Latin America and Canada region, President of the Asia region, and Chief Financial Officer before becoming CEO of PMI America this past May. And in his role, Martin oversees PMI's activities in the US, and he is fully dedicated to the company's transition to smoke-free products. PMI says it is the only tobacco company to commit to not selling cigarettes. So, welcome, panel. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. And
Thank you very much for having us.
I want to kick this session off by asking, what does disruptive innovation mean to each of you? How would you define it? What does it look like? Jaime, why don't you start?
Yeah, thanks again for inviting me. And I think this is an important topic, especially considering what we're going through with the pandemic. But in general, we can look at the last 10 years or so and see innovation happening at a level that we haven't seen before. And part of that idea of disruptive innovation, it's almost like an oxymoron, because the innovation tends to disrupt things, right? And so when we think about the term innovation, we usually think about something that's brand new, that we've never seen before, that's something that's just that comes out of nowhere. And in reality, most, what we call innovation actually comes from something else, right? It's an advancement of another idea. So if you take, for example, the iPhone, and the iPhone, you can talk as a disruptive innovation, but the reality is that iPhone comes from what used to be the BlackBerry, that comes from what used to be the Nokia phone, that comes from what used to be the pager. And so this idea of innovation is really about iteration, about taking things to the next level and constantly looking at what you do, constantly looking at your business, constantly looking at the products that you develop, constantly looking at everything that is involved in your business, and then asking yourself, how do I bring this to the next level, and doing it on a consistent basis.
Martin, how do you see it?
Well, for us, the whole thing starts with the product as well. Sure, disruptive innovation means many things to many businesses, but for us, the start was to change the products that we were selling or are selling to make sure that we're trying to improve the situation for adult smokers. And the technology grew over time to be able to produce products that don't burn and that smokers can switch to. And when we do that and don't have combustion or burning, we can greatly reduce the toxicants, the potentially harmful constituents in the smoke and the aerosol that smokers are getting. And so as we developed the technology and the ability to do that, and we launched the product and found that smokers could successfully switch to it, ideally, obviously, they quit, but they can successfully switch to it, then you realize innovation has to be much broader than just the product. You have to go and change the way you educate your employees. You have to develop new skill sets. You have to have new ways of working. And it starts to affect almost every aspect of the business. And that's what we found over the last few years is we started with what we thought was a pretty important transformation or innovation, and it mushroomed into a series of changes and transformations that have really impacted every corner and every aspect of our business. And it's been a very, very important change for our company.
So let's back up, because obviously you both have had success in developing something out of disruptive innovation. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do you get there, right? Where did it begin? Let me start with you, Martin, because you talked about the development of this new product. Everybody, who smoked typically turned to cigarettes. Now you have this IQOS system where you heat tobacco instead of burning it. And as I understand, it took years to research and develop, right? So how did you even come up with this idea?
Well, it's based in the science. And once you realize that the harmful constituents, it's not the nicotine that's the big issue. It's the side byproducts of combustion or burning. And when you burn any organic matter, you get thousands of these potentially harmful chemicals there that can be greatly eliminated by heating, meaning that you release some taste and some nicotine, but don't form these harmful constituents in nearly the large amounts that are in the worst possible form of nicotine, which is a burning cigarette. So it's not just this product, it's actually a whole lineup of products that we can offer adult smokers that are much less harmful. And of course, you have to have the science behind that. So it took years to develop the product such that it was good enough for people to really switch to. And then it also took years to develop the science and put this in front of, for example, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, which recently authorized the product as a modified risk tobacco product, meaning that they agreed that it has lower levels of the potentially harmful constituents, and people who switch to it completely are exposed much less to these products. So this took time. It took science, it took skill sets that we didn't have before. And then, of course, to go to the marketplace and explain it to people took a whole different mindset and approach than the original mindset we used to have with selling cigarettes, which was just more like business to business. So it took a raft of changes throughout the organization.
I'm going to come back to you in a moment, but I want to turn to Jaime, because I think one thing that Martin just focused on is that it's sometimes innovation is not going to happen overnight. And so I think people get overwhelmed perhaps by thinking, it's time for a change. And, if we don't get results immediately, is it really worth it? Jaime, the example of disruptive innovation that I think of every single day that you are a part of is how we're doing education right now using Google Chromebook. My son is home from school doing remote learning. He was issued a Chromebook from the school district in order to be able to continue education during this time of coronavirus. Can you take us behind the scenes as to how that came about?
Yeah, and I'll be happy to do that. And also, I've been working with a number of businesses, and as I was listening to Martin talk about the process that it took to get to where they are today, what I hear is discipline, right? And I think that's an important element to this, because oftentimes I work with organizations or startups or businesses that want to be more innovative or want to be more creative, and they're like, hey, how do we become more like Google? Do we paint the walls red and throw medicine balls in there and put a pool table up and let anyone dress the way they want? Will that do it? And the reality is that that's not what makes innovation work. What makes innovation work in the 14 years I worked in education, but the 15 years I've been at Google, it was discipline. It was the discipline that it took to recruit the right people, to retain the right people, the discipline that it took to go through performance reviews and set up goals. I mean, we spend hours and hours and hours setting this up so that we can always track what we're doing, so that we can always see where we are. And so this idea of innovation is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes time. So to your point about not happening overnight, it doesn't happen overnight. It's like anything else, right? It's like the stand-up comedian who everyone's like, oh, she was a successful comedian overnight. In reality, she's been doing clubs for 15 years, right? It's this idea of discipline that's behind innovation. With the Chromebook, the Chromebook has been successful because it solves big problems in the education space, mostly that it's really hard to scale technology in just general, right? I mean, I often joke about the day that I dread the most of any day of the year is December 25th, because that's the day that my in-laws get their new technology, and now I have to go implement it. And if it's hard to implement technology for two college-educated people, how hard is it to implement technology for 200,000 people or 200,000 students? And so the ability to scale is what makes the Chromebook successful. The ability that one person can go in and manage all those machines at the same time, and that your kid is on the Chromebook, but technically speaking, he's really in school because he can't get on a public network. He can't get on put viruses on the machine. There's all these benefits. And so it's really about problem solving, right? It's this idea of what is the product or what is the thing that you're doing to service? What problem is that solving? And if it's a big enough problem, or even if it's a small problem, you'll have success because you're solving someone's problem.
So I hear you saying some of this all begins from identifying a problem. Was there an aha moment for you in your time when that's led to innovations like Chromebook, Jaime? What was the pivot point where you decided we got to do something differently?
Yeah, so I started seeing technology grow in K-12. It was already in higher ed, of course. Like at that time, like 85% of students were bringing laptops to campus. It was their own thing. But in K-12, we went from these small computer labs where you would get an hour a day to you started seeing schools buy netbooks, and they were buying, other machines. And these machines would fall apart and break, or they would take just as a simplest problem. If you have a class and you're running 30 students, but you have a cart of machines, a cart of laptops, and you hand them out to every student, and you sit down and you open them up to get going, and it takes 10 minutes to get that to the point where you can start, that's a huge problem in education because you got a 50-minute class. And as an educator, you got your curriculum to go through. You don't want to spend 10 minutes. Imagine walking in a classroom and it took 10 minutes for the lights to turn on before you can get started. And so that was a huge problem. And so the idea that a student can walk in, you can hand them a machine, and they open it up, and 8 seconds later it's ready to go. That's a huge problem to solve. And that's just one of the problems that Chromebook solved in education. And so it's identifying those. So for me, the aha moment was that this machine, this Chromebook, when I saw the demo of it and what I thought about and what it could do in education, was that it solved problems for two groups of people: educators and students, and administrators. And that, to me, is a perfect storm of problem solving, where you're solving problems for lots of different groups at the same time with the same product or the same service. And that's the benefit. And that's why you see the Chromebook grow the way it grew.
Martin, what was your aha moment?
Well, we had been trying for years to develop these products. And the issue wasn't knowing what to do as far as heating instead of burning. The issue was making it acceptable to adult smokers to switch to, and the taste being adequate, and for the overall experience and reliability to be adequate. So we tried several times. We had products that heated from the outside of the tobacco piece and that left papery taste. We had products that were like large beepers, and you had to use a big piece. So coming up with the innovation of having an internal piece that comes separately, and it's about the size of a normal cigarette. And most especially the innovation of heating from inside. In other words, using a blade to go up into the tobacco and using the electricity to heat that blade very precisely, release just the right amount of flavors from the tobacco so that when people tried it, it was close enough to cigarettes and the experience that they could actually switch. Because while many of these products have been out there before, the problem is adult smokers often don't fully switch to them. They either dual use them or they eventually go back to cigarettes because it's just not satisfying enough for them. And so that was the big breakthrough. It was actually trying again and again, being very consumer centric, listening to consumers as to what the taste needed to be like and how it needed to perform in order for them to fully convert, because that's absolutely the holy grail, is full conversion. If people are dual using, they're not actually getting the full benefit of the reduced formation of the toxicants that comes from heating instead of burning. So we have lots of tries at it. And persistence, time is right. Persistence and sticking with it, believing in what you're trying to do. I mean, this is a decades-long endeavor. And in fact, we've invested over $7 billion in it. So you have to really stick with it and believe in it and keep coming back to the basics of doing what the consumer is asking of you. And that's what finally panned out for us.
Can you hold that up again? Because when I look at that, it's not necessarily what, I'm personally not a smoker, but I did live in Colorado, born in Colorado, where there's been obviously the explosion of the use of marijuana for recreational use. And you hear and see a lot of conversation around sort of the e-cigarette style device. Is that similar to what is an e-cigarette? Is it technically an e-cigarette or is it something different? And why? What makes it?
It is different from an e-cigarette. An e-cigarette uses a liquid, and then it uses some form of heating to create the aerosol by basically boiling the liquid, cooking the liquid that has nicotine in it. This product's different. It actually has real tobacco, and it has like a plug of tobacco in a consumable piece that's very similar in circumference to a cigarette. It's a little bit shorter. And you push it into the device that has a blade that cuts up into the tobacco part, and then the electrics, the electronics, the battery, and the blade control the temperature very precisely at each puff to release an aerosol that has nicotine in it, but also some flavors from tobacco, but without burning. There's no combustion. The temperature is controlled below the level of combustion. And the result is you get an experience that starts and stops like a cigarette, that delivers some tobacco notes and tastes, not exactly like a cigarette because you don't burn, but close enough. And you deliver nicotine, and people experience the nicotine in a similar way to a cigarette. Now, the benefits of this are conversion, because we have 70% of people who buy these devices fully convert, which is an outstanding percentages compared to other products out there. And then the other benefit is you have it very much focused on adult smokers, current adult smokers, because it's tobacco, because of the taste, everything else. It has a great track record in the 57 countries where we've launched it of being very focused and very successful at being used by adult smokers as opposed to unintended users like youth, which is the big issue, right, in the U.S. with e-cigarettes, and also making sure that former smokers even or other adults that are not picking it up, because we don't want this product to expand the use of nicotine because it is addictive. The focus is on existing adult smokers, of which there are 1 billion out there in the world. So we have a lot of opportunity to gain market share for our competitors and so forth. So this is why this product is different from e-cigarettes. However, e-cigarettes can also be a positive innovation as long as they are properly manufactured and as long as they are properly scientifically assessed, and especially, most importantly of all, that they be kept out of the hands of youth.
So, there's the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And sometimes it can be hard for people to see the benefit of making a change. Jaime, how do you address that?
Yeah, it's one of these questions that I get all the time, which is, how do you deal with resistance to change? And oftentimes the best answer I have for that, because this is what people resist, is I have no idea, because I'm too busy working with people that want to change. I think human nature tends to focus on those that are the most resistant, right? The ones that give you the most trouble, right? And so if you look at a standard deviation of acceptance, you're always going to have that 5% of people up at the top that will do anything. They're the early adopters. They'll go with everybody. They're loyal, all that. Then you have the 5% on the bottom, right? I saw a survey from like 25 years ago where they asked Americans, check every day you dislike. And like 7% of Americans dislike every day, right? So you're always going to have that 5% on the bottom that you're just never going to convince. It's working in that middle group, that 80% who are like, I want to go with you, but I need more, right? And so we tend to go focus on that 7% or that 5% on the back end, when we should be spending our time working those that they want to change, they want to do things differently. Now, the other part of this is that the change isn't what people are resistant to. People are resistant to pain. And oftentimes we walk into the room with pain. I worked with many CEOs and leaders who walk in a room and say, listen, the change that we're about to go through is going to be difficult. And you lost them. They're done, right? And so this idea of don't highlight the pain, highlight what I call the private plane. This idea that, oh, when we're done with this, you will never have to go on an airport again. You can just get on a private plane and take off whenever you want. Like that is an illustration of a change that anybody would accept. And so how do we get that private plane picture in front of people that says, this change is going to bring us these benefits. This is what's good for you. This is what's going to work. And so being able to focus on that group of people who want to change, who are willing to change, who are there to change, and hope that the rest that don't want to change come along eventually, to me is the strategy that's worked for me in the past.
What have you seen, Martin, as the biggest challenge in innovating in your space?
Well, for us, if you look at the different constituencies involved, the different stakeholders, if you will, for employees, this was a no-brainer. Our employees were on board with transforming the company out of cigarettes and towards non-combustible products very quickly. Because if you have worked for this company, you know it's a great company, but you always worried about the product and felt that, gee, we really would like to be selling something that was less harmful. So this is easy. Employees are all in favor of the change. Smokers also pretty clearly, once they have a product that they can switch to, they are, pretty quick to say this is something that interests me. In some countries like Japan, we've already converted about 20% of the adult smokers over to these products. So it's going very well. Smokers get it. Some still want to stick with their cigarettes and take them longer, but eventually we'll be able to, I think, explain this to smokers and convince them that this is a better choice. Investors were a little tougher. As the chief financial officer of the company for several years during the most disruptive time of the innovation, there were times when investors were saying, privately, it's not broken. Why are you doing this? We have a wonderful dividend machine, very profitable company and business, very stable. And, this is disruptive. This is causing fluctuations in our stock price, causing fluctuations in the income, because it came sometimes big success, sometimes it slowed down. So eventually, though, I think the investors get it because it's a more sustainable long-term business, right? You have a product that doesn't do as much harm, and therefore you can also take share from competitors. So I think it's a pretty compelling piece. The trickiest one of all, though, has been sort of society at large. And you have different groups in society. Some are very excited by the science and embrace it fairly quickly, but you have a very large group of individuals and organizations that are very suspicious, understandably so. It's coming from a large tobacco company with a fraught history. So we have been working really hard to try to reach out, go back to the science, go back to the facts. You try to use third-party verification like the FDA, which has done the scientific validation over the course of 3 years and really looked at the data, the facts, the base science behind it and come to their conclusions. But it's been difficult. I mean, there are many groups out there that are having a hard time with this as a real harm reduction innovation, and whether they should embrace it or whether this is just, another story of the big tobacco, et cetera. So this is the most difficult, most challenging aspect, is to consistently, regularly get out there, try to explain, be patient, understand why they're skeptical, which I do, and so forth. So that's been our biggest challenge.
How do you figure out when the answer is to keep going, to push harder, versus this was not the right path? Jaime, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? How do you know? How do you know? I mean, that's true in anything in life, right? How do you know? You know, you're dating somebody a year and a half. You're like, how do you know? Like, it's just one of those things in life that we always deal with. But on the business side, there's a word that we tend to use in the business world, like, you know, when you fail, you succeed, or, you know, more failures, the better. And, you know, we talk about failure. I don't like the word failure, especially in education. We talk about, we need to teach kids how to fail. And the reason why I don't like the word failure in today's world is because the word failure has an opposite word, which is succeed. And so we don't live in a world of successes and failures anymore. We live in a world of constant iteration. And so even when I don't ever look at something as a failure, you look at something as the potential to iterate it to the next level. So if something's not working, you look at it again and you look for another angle, or you look for another distribution model, or you look for another way of using it. Same thing with successes. When something succeeds, you do the same thing. So the philosophy, the innovation philosophy is the same, no matter whether your thing, your product, your service is succeeding or in a traditional sense failing. It doesn't matter. You have to constantly do this. You have to constantly look at this, right? It's same thing's true with learning, right? We talk about this idea of learning. I remember when I graduated from graduate school and I'm sitting there and I was thinking, I wrote my last paper on my WordPerfect 5.1 software package, and I sent it to the dot matrix printer. And I remember hitting print and saying, I am done learning. I never have to learn again, right? That wasn't true. It's constant learning. We live now in a time where we're constantly learning, constantly reinventing things, constantly iterating things. And that's the world that we're in now. And we have to get used to that. And our business cycles have to look the same way.
You both are obviously so passionate. You've been doing, you know, what you've been doing for a long time. Martin, we mentioned you've been with PMI since 2003. When you've invested that much of yourself into your area of focus or into just even one company, you know, you do know the marketplace really well. You might know your products really well, but how do you make sure you don't have blind spots so that, you know, you're not excluding certain ideas from even being considered? Martin?
Yeah, I think it's learning to be extremely consumer centric, and also learning how to ask the right questions. Because if you often just go out there and ask consumers what they want, they actually don't necessarily know, and are not able to tell you what they want. You have to ask building block questions and come back to understanding more deeply what they're looking for and what their preferences are, even in ways that maybe they don't realize. And so having that inquisitive mind that Hyman talked about is really, really important. But it's not enough to just go out and say, what do you want? Because you're never going to get, I don't think, a clear answer by asking that question. You have to really pick it apart and go down to detail and nuance and get to know your consumer. And that's an important aspect, is also your organization needs to be in sync and in touch with your consumer. Meaning this is where diversity comes into play. This is where you really need to have people that can understand all of the different individuals out there on their own level and be able to really get what they're trying to tell you when it's not so obvious and it's not put in front of you squarely in simple terms. It's nuance.
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought up diversity. Go ahead, Jaime.
I was just going to add to what Martin says, because he's absolutely right. But in addition to that, I remember one of the principles at Google for the 15 years that I was there was focus on your users, right? And it's a weird word to use, but focus on your users, the ones that are using your products and services. Pay attention to what they do. That's absolutely critical. But there's a great Henry Ford quote that I used to use in my presentations, where he said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would ask me for a faster horse. Right. And so this idea that your customers or your users, or whatever you want to call them, don't know what you want. Like, you know, even the idea of send us suggestions, you know, what I call the passive aggressive suggestion boxes that you find in companies. You have to not just go in and ask them the right questions. You have to observe them. You have to gather data. You have to, you know, it's like being able, and that's why I was actually talking at a university yesterday about the whole idea of data science and how that category of of a career is that we haven't even scratched the surface on what data science can do and what it's going to do. But this idea of being able to pay attention to what they do and how they do it. There's a great story of a college president. I don't even think it's a true story, but it's a great story anyway. But that they were about to pave the sidewalks on a new part of the campus, and the president said, "No, don't do it yet." And what they did instead was just watched where the students walked, and then they paved then they actually put concrete on those spaces, right? So they let all the grass, and then they just covered where students walk. Because how many times you walk on a campus and you see the actual road that you're supposed to take, and then you see the path that students actually take, right? And so that's a great example of observing and collecting data and understanding what your customers and your users are actually doing. And that's an important part of this as well.
I want to remind all of our audience members and participants today to ask your questions. We're going to be getting to some of those questions here in just a few minutes. Again, you can just type them into that text box on the right side of your screen, and I'll try to get through as many as possible with the time that we have left. But before we turn to those viewer questions, let me follow up on this issue of diversity, because our nation has gone through a racial reckoning in the past few months in particular, and it's really, I think, disrupted businesses and organizations. And it's made all of our companies look at how they're doing things, reassess who's part of the team and what the priorities are. Martin, how has that disruption shaken up your industry?
Well, it certainly made us look within our company at our practices and whether we're doing enough. We're a company that does business in 180 countries around the world. Our team in the U.S. is actually just a very small, tiny portion of our total employee base. We have actually, a relatively small group in the U.S. So for us, it's back to the root question of, is our company equipped to understand our consumer? Are we reflecting our consumers and where we do business within our company, from a nationalities point of view, from an ethnic point of view? We had spent a lot of time in the last years working on gender issues and trying to improve the representation of women in management and on our board, et cetera. And I think, we have pretty good diversity from a nationalities point of view, but we definitely have some blind spots, and we definitely have some areas where we need to continue to work hard to identify people for promotions and so forth from within the company in a very equitable way, and making sure we're reaching further to consider people that maybe have been overlooked in the past, and also in our hiring practices. So we've gone back and looked at where we need to do better, and we obviously recognize that we have a lot of work to do. And this just sharpened the attention to it. But we were aware of it, we were working on it, we had a number of programs in place, but it made us come back and say, that's probably not enough. You need to do more, and you need to do it more specifically in areas that perhaps you weren't as focused on before. And the U.S. is one piece of it, but this movement, if you will, to question and look at how we're treating different groups in society is taken worldwide implications. So we're approaching this in every country. Each country has different issues, by the way. It's not all the same, right. But we are very focused on it everywhere.
Right, and I'm sure though it would help in order to connect with a more diverse, consumer, right? If you have more of those more diverse members as part of the team that are helping to, collaborate and brainstorm and innovate. Absolutely. So Jaime, I know how important equity and diversity and inclusion is in the work that you are doing, but the current education system we know is still full of disparity, and it's not working for everyone. The studies continue to show there's an achievement gap between students of color or communities of color and their white constituents or counterparts. Why do you think that is? And what kind of disruptive innovation needs to happen in the education system to close that gap?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's where my focus is, not just in education, but to follow up on what Martin said about the business world. I think I look at what's happening with social justice issues, diversity, inclusion, and all these things in the business world as an opportunity, right? Like, this is a great opportunity. If I said to you in 2010, hey, I think I was discriminated against at work, the response would have been like, no, we're over that. That was a long time ago. Today, if I say, you're like, yeah, probably, right? So there's an awareness. There's oh yeah, no, these are big issues. So I look at that idea that we have awareness and that we have an opportunity to tackle these things. To your point, and to me, this goes to your point about education, this goes beyond skin color. This goes into ideas, right? And what I mean by that, and this is the problem that I'm trying to solve currently, is, I grew up as a first generation American. I grew up, my mother came here from Argentina. I grew up on welfare and food stamps in Hell's Kitchen, New York, old school Hell's Kitchen, New York from the 70s and 80s. And I blame education for where I am today, right? This is where I start my presentations usually, is with this concept that education is what disrupts poverty. And so we have to make sure that when we say the word education, that it's not just the same education across the board, but that it is equitable education. And so, yes, there's differences between rich school districts and poor school districts, and that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Well, why does, in our communities, it's not like the poor communities don't have fire trucks. They have like little bicycles with water guns. No, they have fire trucks, they have firehouses. They have the same equipment in the poor neighborhood than they do in a rich neighborhood, right? So why aren't we doing the same thing with schools? But more importantly, why aren't we looking at those equity issues? Because given my background and how I grew up, I don't get to meet a lot of people like me at my position, or where you can have an influence and where you can actually make substantial changes. And so we're leaving talent on the ground. We're missing out. The Latino market is $1 trillion market. The African American market is $1 trillion market. Who's building products and services for those markets? That's the opportunity. That's why I'm focused in this space, because I think that we have tremendous opportunity to come up with problem solutions and come up with products and come up with new services based on this idea that everyone can get involved and everyone has something to add. And because we live in this economy now, this long tail economy where anyone can pick up a laptop and start something, education, the big word education, not the education system, but education as in learning, becomes the most important thing you can focus on.
Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes before our audience questions. So let me give you both a chance to just address the idea of what's next. As you look at the horizon, whether it's in your industry specifically or something else that you feel really passionate about, what do you see as that next, innovative problem, issue to address that you want to tackle? And you may not have the idea fully formed, but where do you think things are headed, Martin?
Well, I think for us, there are plenty of more product innovations to come. And I think we keep working really hard at converting 1 billion smokers out there out of smoking, and either have them quit using nicotine entirely, or if they're not going to quit, then offer them the better products. And we have a number of different platforms in the works, and making sure that they are properly tested and scientifically verified, and then fitting them into the different consumer experiences and situations and times and so forth. So we have a long runway in front of us around product innovation. Right. What's interesting, the whole COVID experience and so forth, the question mark is probably more so is how do we get our work done within the company? And we're having a lot of discussions around what does the future work site look like? How do we balance, the new embracing of technology and this remote working approach, but also realize that, especially for new employees, you have to build relationships. Some in-person time is probably valuable, and how do you get the benefits of all this technology and Teams approach and so forth, and get our work done more effectively, and build a place to work that's more fun to work in, more inclusive, better than what we've had in the past. And it's opened our eyes as to what the possibilities are. We have much more appetite for innovation inside the company than before.
Jaime?
Yeah, this is timely, because I'm actually writing my script for my new video for my YouTube channel about this topic, because it doesn't seem like it is right now. And I bet you if I was in a room, people would throw things at me. But the pandemic is the greatest thing to happen to education. I know it doesn't seem like it right now, but it is. You have to think long term, because what we're doing is we're starting to recognize, whoa, this old system that we have, we can't just take that and put it online. That doesn't work. Oh, parents, look at the surveys about parents saying how much they value teachers now, right? Like, well, maybe we'll start paying teachers the right salary, right? And we're starting to see these old models. And so right now what's happening, and this is what happens with innovation in general, is that you take this new idea, this online thing, and you try to replace your current model with it. So what's happening in education is, instead of having a teacher in a room with 30 students looking at the teacher, we're going to do this online, where a teacher's going to talk and all the kids are going to be remote and they're going to pay attention. And that's just not going to work, right? And you're starting to see it not work. And so what's going to happen from that is innovation is going to come from that. New ideas are going to come, new products are going to come from that. And we're going to see new models of education where you'll start seeing all this awareness. That's part one. And the second part is this idea of the lack of resources and equity in education has been highlighted like never before. So these two things, I think, is going to reshape what education is going to look like. Because I often say that education wasn't broken in its development, in its sense, because it did exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that the world is fundamentally changing, and what we need to do is think about the best ideas that we have and create a system that helps students face that future. And nothing has propelled us more in that direction than this pandemic.
Okay, so we have a little under 10 minutes to get to some of these questions. So guys, I'm going to try to get through as many as possible. Please keep your answers relatively succinct. And let me just start with this one from Ruben, who asks, how important is it to disrupt our own organization before our industry or company gets disrupted? Jaime?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the person who should be disrupting you is you. You shouldn't wait until something happens in the industry to react to it. And that just happens. That's a natural thing. So you have to have processes in place. You have to have check marks in place to consistently do that. So you're always iterating.
And Martin, do you want to add on to that, or should I move to the next one?
Yeah, proactive is far better than reactive. And we're very fortunate to be in the forefront, and we're driving the change, and it's much better than having to respond to what other people are doing.
Okay, so innovation tends to cluster in specific cities like Austin and Silicon Valley. This is a question from Nina. How can communities make themselves attractive to disruptive innovators? I'll start with you on this one, Martin.
Yeah, I don't think it's a geography. It's a mindset, and it's people playing off each other. So innovation feeds on innovation, and people that are creative and come up with ideas, when you put them together, you get a multiplying effect. And so I think if you can create nodes within a company or organization or a geography, you have to look at what are the right circumstances to do that. And openness, inclusion, being able to speak your mind, freedom to act as opposed to being very prescripted. All of these things are what you try to create. And in a big company, it's very difficult because big companies tend to be, more regimented, and those environments are more difficult to create. So you have to work at it. You have to really question yourself and ask yourself, am I creating the ecosystem of innovation that I want? And that's what you have to keep trying to do.
Jaime, this question's from Yvette. Let me just move on to this next one, and maybe you have something you can fold into this answer as well. But what recommendation would you give a Latinx trying to be a biz owner of an innovative product seeking an investor when they have not gained credibility yet?
That's a great question. And one of those questions that I'm trying to tackle with something that I launched, another company that I launched around this idea of how do we connect investors? Like, how do we connect my billionaire friends and the VCs and all those out there, not necessarily from a diversity perspective with people of color, but with ideas of color? Like, how do we connect the VC that's in Silicon Valley with that Latina in South Philly who has this amazing idea for a clothing line that VC is never going to understand? Like, what are those checkpoints in place that we have to do that? So that's absolutely a problem that we need to solve. What I would say now is that there are a number of VCs out there that are looking to invest in diversity. They are looking to invest in different ideas. What we need to create are experts in those spaces that can vet and verify those ideas. And that's what I'm trying to work on.
And Martin, I'll ask you this. How can disruptive innovation be applied to policy making and coalition building in the nonprofit space? So given your own experience, how would you, what advice can you offer for people trying to do it in a different way?
Well, I mean, you can apply innovation anywhere. It's not specific to business or anything else. I mean, some of the most creative, innovative ideas come in the arts or in nonprofits and so forth. So it's back to that idea of creating the environment that fosters innovation and, being willing to change, being open to new ideas, giving people room is probably the hardest thing, and even in nonprofits. Nonprofits can be just as stifling as big companies. I mean, it's just about mindset and environment and openness, and that's up to the leadership to help set the groundwork, but it also comes from the folks doing the innovation to fight for your space, keep the persistence of challenging and so forth in a constructive way. But I think that can be applied in nonprofits just as well as it can in business.
Jaime, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that this idea of what the future work's going to look like, we don't know. If anyone tells you they know, they don't know. Like, the question before about communities and where you can, how do you invent or how do you bring innovation into your community? You already have innovation in your community. I used to, back in the olden days when I traveled around the country, I would always bring up the computer science stat, the number of people, the number of jobs in computer science that were available in that specific state. And it doesn't matter what state you're in, it was always like either 2.5 or 3.5 times the average demand of any other job. So innovation is everywhere. And this new world, right? Like when Twitter says, oh, we are now a work from home company, and you can work anywhere, what is that going to look like for our communities? And so what communities need to do is prepare for that. Do they have, as Martin said, do they have the environment? Do they have the ecosystem so that you can get young people? And by the way, we haven't even talked about this Generation Z, and the things that they care about. They care more about the geography, the balance of life, and the things that the fulfillment parts of life. And I think that's even going to be more so after this pandemic. And so putting all that stuff together brings you these communities of innovation, and that's what communities need to focus on.
A couple more questions I think we have time for. How can we ensure that the positive impact of disruptive innovation is inclusive for society at large, especially disadvantaged communities? Jaime, I see you shaking your head. I'll let you start.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important topic. And so when I talk to students, so I often go talk to students, especially students that are growing up the way I grew up, like in the Year Up program, for example, and I go tell them that, who they are and where they come from. Not be ashamed of that. Don't hide that. Use it, own it. Like that is your competitive advantage. I can tell you that I'm usually the only person who has my point of view in most rooms that I'm in. And a lot of that has to do with the way I grew up and my perspective and my point of view of life and the things that happen to you in life. And so for me, telling students that their perspective, their point of view is their competitive advantage is a different type of message than we typically tell students. And so it's not about trying to get our disadvantaged students to fit into this new world, but instead letting them own who they are and where they come from so that they can propel into the future. And so that to me is the most important thing that we can focus on, is because we have this opportunity. So when students say to me, how do I get a job at Google? I'm like, don't get a job at Google, start Google, right? Like that's the opportunity that we have.
All right. I think we're at the time where it's your opportunity, both Martin and Jaime, to offer your closing thoughts and messages. So why don't you start us off, Martin?
Yeah. So, innovation has been such a critical aspect of making the world better. Sure, sometimes innovation brings challenges with it and it goes in directions that people didn't foresee. So you have to keep using it. But overall, I think having a more creative, innovative society or business or nonprofit, as you pointed out earlier, is very much a positive for society, for the world. And so learning what are the things that can help an organization or a society be more and more innovative, and how do you make it happen, is something that I think we should study, we should learn, we should teach it in school, and make sure people understand that there's skill sets you can gain to be more creative, innovative, brainstorming skills, all the things that make each one of us realize that we have tons of ideas if we just let them out. And so fostering that, I think panels like this to stop for a moment and start thinking about, what is it that creates innovation? What are the things that we can do to have more of it is a net positive. Now, clearly, we have to check ourselves along the way and make sure that our creative outcomes are being positively received, and maybe regulations need to evolve to help make sure that they're not misused, and so forth. But overall, this is a big positive for society, and I think crisis times like what we're going through with coronavirus and polarization and all these big topics that are out there, the only way we're going to get through it is through more innovation and more problem solving and finding ways to be creative and come up with new solutions and not just keep doing the same old things. So this has been a great panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And to you, Jaime, I'll let you offer your thoughts.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one is I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and I see nothing but opportunity in front of us. I see the fact that we haven't even talked about where technology is going in the future, and this idea that disruption we're just at the very, 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 very beginning of this, right? I often think about this breakthrough that Google had a couple months before I left in quantum computing. And the breakthrough, I'm not going to go into quantum computing. I can see everybody's eyeballs rolling. But the breakthrough in quantum computing that they had was if you took a mathematical formula that spins and you fed it to a supercomputer, the world's most powerful supercomputer, it would take that supercomputer 10,000 years to process that equation. If you fed that same equation to this breakthrough that Google had in quantum computing, they did it in 300 seconds. 10,000 years versus 300 seconds. What is in between those two numbers, and what's beyond that 300 seconds? That just to me is like this whole world that we can't even imagine yet. And we think we're innovative now, wait 10 years, right? And so this idea of where we're headed and what the technology can do and what disruption is going to do to us is one thing. So for me, when I talk to students, the question that we always ask students is, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? That's the question. You've asked people that question. People get that question all the time. People ask my 5-year-old that question. That's the wrong question. That question doesn't make sense anymore. Jobs change too fast. I just talked about 10,000 years versus 300 seconds. I have friends that are working in jobs and industries that you don't even know about yet. The better question that we should be asking students instead is what's the problem that you want to solve, right? What's that problem that spins in your head? And it doesn't have to be a business problem. It could be a social problem. It could be any problem. It could be a Shark Tank problem. But what's that problem you want to solve? And then this is where the diversity and inclusion part comes in. The second question is, how do you want to solve it? How do you want to take your gifts, your talents, your passions, and solve that problem? Because there's a million ways to solve a problem. And just because you want to solve climate change doesn't mean that you have to go become a researcher or a scientist. You can solve climate change by being a photographer and going out and documenting climate change. So how do you want to solve it? And then the third question, and this is where I think the biggest opportunity is to ask yourself, or to ask students, what do you need to know to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? And guess what? You have literally the whole world's information at your fingertips to solve that problem. And so when people say to me, when adults say to me, I'm not very creative, or I'm just not good with technology, my response to them is, this is why I don't have a lot of friends. My response is, no, you've chosen not to be good with technology. You've chosen not to be creative, because everything that you need to be creative or to be good at technology or to solve a problem that you're passionate about is out there already. And so that's why I'm a glass half full person, because I think we have this tremendous opportunity to solve so many problems in the future based on disruptive innovation.
Well said, both of you. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Martin, both of you, for offering your advice, your insights, your expertise, your experience. All of it has been incredibly informative. It's been so inspiring for me personally. I hope it has for everybody who has been participating today. What I think I really took away from both of you, especially as you presented kind of those concluding remarks, is just that we all have power within ourselves to create and innovate. And a problem really is the same as an opportunity. So when you look at a problem, you can think of it as an opportunity, and we should all embrace those challenges and surround ourselves with people who also are like-minded in that spirit of wanting to have that can-do attitude and looking for how can we do this better, and how can I tackle whatever it is that I see before me as a problem in order to create a better place or a better space or a more successful business. So I guess that's my challenge to all of our participants today, is to stay disciplined, stay optimistic, and just keep working hard, and allow that energy and that practice of problem solving to take you to that place of I think, greatest satisfaction and fulfillment in whatever it is the industry or organization or efforts are that you're pursuing. And again, thanks to everybody for being here. Just a couple of quick notes I want to wrap up with, and I want you to keep tweeting, if you will. The hashtag is CHCIHHM20. You, of course, are welcome to attend multiple sessions as we continue throughout the week, throughout today. You're registered, so you can attend any session. And to find, a session you're interested in, go to www.chcihhm.org/agenda. And invite your friends. If you have people who haven't registered yet, it's not too late. If they want to participate this week, they can register at chcihhm.live. And then don't forget about the gala celebration. It's virtual, of course, on Monday evening at September 21st. That will happen from 6 until 8 p.m. And once you register for the conference, you'll be registered for that gala as well. So there's nothing more than just to log back in. Again, thank you for participating. Be well, stay safe, and good luck in all your innovation.